our reactors. So I'd like to invite our speakers and reactors over here in front, on stage. And we have microphones for you. Earlier, before the break, Mr. Anderson mentioned, food be with you. We did distribute 2 fishes and 5 loaves of bread around. I hope everybody was able to eat. Okay? So now we will have the open forum. People will be going around to get the paper that has your questions on it. Our moderator for this afternoon is no other than Dean Toby Berry. Let's give him a nice round of applause here. So I'll turn over the floor to Dean Toby.
Okay, I have some questions here, but before, while we read through the questions, and we'll have about 30 minutes, 30 minutes to this, over the timekeeper. We'll entertain questions from the floor, and then we can alternate with the questions which are given. I'll start with questions from the floor, if there's anyone. Yes. Please introduce yourself and state your account.
I'm Roger Richard from Jersey Recruitment. The other day, there was a USA-funded forum on genetic modified organisms in the House at the Belmonte Hall. And Congressman Fernandez, the chairman of the Ecology Committee, asked directly what is the increase in price for GMO plants or crops or seeds. And he was told it will be at 30% higher. And that is an important economic consideration that should be looked into besides the GUE's wow technology of the GMO industry. Number 2, I know for a fact that Monsanto has prevented scientists from doing research on their Monsanto seeds unless they get their permission. Number 2, they cannot publish their results unless they get the permission of Monsanto. And that to me is a violation of academic freedom and the right to do research and report your results properly. And the third problem that I have with Monsanto is that they have practiced a very Filipino mode of appointments. They have appointed and gotten their people appointed to the Department of Agriculture of the United States, and they're using the United States embassies to promote GMOs all over the world. Thank you.
You're directing your question to...
No question, just statement.
Do you have any comments? Make a comment or a comment. Mike?
Yes, thank you, Roger, for pointing that out. Actually, if you look at the whole universe of global agricultural research, you have the corporate sector and the public sector. The corporate sector is set up the way you said, maybe for business. The only way I think developing countries can cope with this trend is to further support the public sector. Invest in public goods that are produced by institutions, research institutions of the Department of Agriculture or the state universities and colleges. The only problem I see is that the state universities and colleges are forced to sell also their products. Now, I think this issue about IPR will have to be taken in the context of a country that is developing, where at the end of the day, whatever you charge as a royalty will be passed on to the people who may not be able to afford to pay the royalty. The farmers will have to pay that. The companies that access technologies produced by UV or CNSU or or whatever, will have to pass on that cost to the farmer. So, I still advocate for a certain portion of these technologies, especially those related to the right of people for food, to be conveyed and cascaded as public goods. But they have to be publicly supported. That's the only way we can balance the whole thing. Because hindi naman natin pwede pakilaman ng santo eh. That's their business. They have to survive. But in order for us to be able to provide poor farmers, resourceful farmers, or whatever crop, let us have a very vigorous program that will produce public goods. These public goods are freely available on a non-exclusive basis for that, so people can use it. Our genes, our seeds that are in the gene bank are public goods. You don't even have to spend for the baby cost to pay for it.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here, and I don't know if the relatives from Alex, David, and Jenny Kim from Ateneo de Manila University. Yes, 3 questions, but I'll just give one. I guess it's for Dr. Padolina. What are the most efficient, and maybe Dr. Gerard can also add from the fisheries sector. What are the most efficient and sustainable crops and fish that our country should invest in to produce food, as well as other income-generating products at the same time?
That's a difficult question because many of the information we really get are anecdotal. The only information I know that has scientific basis is the experiment we are doing in front of Erie, which is a 45-year continuous cultivation of rice. 3 crops a year, continuously, since 45 years ago. There is a plot there that has never been fertilized for 45 years. 3 times a year it's harvested. And you know what? The yields are steady at 3 tons per hectare. Now, we don't understand yet what is happening. Something is happening in the soil that regenerates the whole field. Even if the rice plant picks up these minerals from the soil, there is something happening which is probably microbial in nature, but which we need to study. That is probably also why Asian civilizations have survived. Because even without, fertilizing, they have food. May not be enough for everybody, or they may have to eat only very little, but they still live. Unlike other crops where they just had, like in Central America, civilizations just got wiped out. That is the only solid scientific information that I can get. So if we have other long-term trials, which I suppose will be the best basis for saying it's sustainable, then we should probably inform the public about that, because that can be a very good guide for those who are trying to design farming systems. Let me say, before I sit down, that at this point in time, it's very difficult to just survive on rice farming. It's very difficult. Because, rice is a staple, we have to keep the price low. That's just the nature of the beast. That's also the dilemma of the food industry. Once it's a staple food, you have to keep the price low because it is important for food security.
Thank you. Dr. Guerrero?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think short answer is, if you want to raise fish or self-sufficient in fish, you can think of 2 species, bait fish or natural fish, and tilapia, which is for Africa. That's an adopted Filipino fish. I think I'm biased for tilapia, but I think worldwide now, tilapia is the easiest fish to breed and small to big right? However, you can raise it from the uplands to the coastal areas. Simple technology. Okay? But for milkfish, you have to have hatcheries. You know, not everybody can breed milkfish, but anybody in this country can breed tilapia. It's no problem. Then you don't have to feed it with commercial feed. You can use leftovers, you can use compost. You know, we're now working on organic tilapia. Okay, using earthworms to replace fish feed. This has been my next contribution to science, I hope. Milkfish is for commercial operators. If you want to make money, go to milkfish. But if you want to be self-fish sufficient, grow tilapia.
Okay, we'll entertain a question from the audience. Is there anyone from the audience? Yes, please.
This question is for Sok Mansuela. Sok, you gave 3 factors to which you attribute the success of Pecuaria. Organization, the organizer, and budget. But you also touched on, and the video seemed to emphasize organic technology. How much of a factor is that? Had they used conventional chemical farming? They have been successful too with those 3 factors?
I was mentioning those 3 factors with the view that if you want to scale up, it's important to understand that you need those. You need strong organizations. You need more community organizers, and you need more funding, because these are exactly what we don't have right now, and these are really the key areas where we really need to respond in a very proactive way. Now, it's true, the community organizer or the organization will have to move in this area three major types of work. One is securing land tenure. That's the first step. And I said it took them 4 years. Even in a partnership arrangement, it was not easy to get the title into the hands of the farmer. Even it was already voluntary offered to sell or sell. There's a lot of processes that obviously it's a 28-step, and it's not that easy. And you need a very good community organizer to do that. Trained one. But then after having the land in the hands of the farmer with the title, the next step is what to do with the land, and that's where they came up with an integrated, diversified, organic farming system. Now understand that these farmers have been into chemical agriculture, and there has been a critique among us in the NGO, civil society community, in this kind of agriculture. That we've been innovating, we've been looking for alternatives since the 1980s. That's why there was this farmer-scientist partnership, masipag, initiated then by ACS Dinky and some scientists from UPLB. And we were product of that, our federation. We studied that, we trained farmers going to that. And to a large extent, you know, these small farmers in the Pecuaria became very much involved into organic agriculture. And it took them around 12 years to develop their specific organic rice, red rice variety. They call it, as I said earlier, 1126, and Blandy red rice. That's their term. It was not coming from Erie then. And I must say there must be a way we could link further our farming communities to the area and to open up what are the possibilities there also, because for many years we've been very critical on dairy, and until now we are very much concerned with the issue on GMO, and that's why we were discussing it. But the issues of climate change is very real, and we need to really dialogue on many issues, while we have very serious concerns on safety and sustainability, etc.
Yeah, while you have the mic, there's a question also for so this is from Oscar Malapa from UP Manila. How can we implement genuine land reform when issues like Hacienda Luisita cannot be resolved?
It's a very serious question. I agree very much. I was talking with Dr. Padolina on that, and my position has always been, if there was really moral leadership during the time in 1987, 88, on Hacienda Luisita, perhaps agrarian reform could not have dragged until this day. It could have been faster, lesser farmers killed, and we could have moved farther forward, just like what happened in Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. They did it very fast. And they enlarged immediately the domestic market, increased the purchasing power of the millions of farmers, and therefore the economy grew. And that was the basis of their robust economic development and even political democracy, greater political democracy later on. That did not happen with us because of the question and you're asking, Hacienda Luisita. We really need to perhaps put the necessary pressure for finally getting that land distributed. Perhaps there's a need for public pressure. More.
Perhaps I'd like to pass the question on to Mr. Anderson. If you have any global perspective on land reform in other countries.
Thank you. I don't know that I'm probably the best one to answer this question, but every country, of course, has to. I think what I can say is that land reform is a challenge in every country, and every country has to take its own path. And so we've seen some countries where it seems like it's gone very quickly, and yet but it actually didn't take root on the ground. But others where it takes longer, but actually it's much more sustainable. So I think that if you look at sustainably addressing food security issues, you have to look at land reform, and increasingly, even many of the people that we assist here in central Mindanao, where we're working in the conflict area, they're actually not owning the land. They're tenants, and this is what makes things very, very complicated when the whole issue of land ownership. It still remains a very major challenge, I think, here in the Philippines.
Thank you. This question is for Dr. Guerrero. It's from Kimberly Annalyn of Chiang Kai-shek and also Andre Tan of Chiang Kai-shek. Two related questions. You advised us to collect rainwater for environmental purposes and fisheries. What if the rain is dirty or acidic? How would it be beneficial to collect? And second question, if there will be a scarcity in fisheries or aquaculture, what can be an alternative food source?
For the first question, if you're in the uplands, I said collect rain for the lowlands. The rain is quite fresh, clean. The problem with acid rain is in industrialized area. You can still collect water for your buildings for flushing toilets. Don't use drinking water to flush your toilets. So the green technology now is to collect rain from your rooftops, pass it down to the basement, but you have to pump it up to flush your toilets. Don't drink it. Okay? So those are two different things. Collect rain for the drought, dry spells, for many uses, but you can still do it in the cities. Collect rain in the rooftops, store them in your basement, pump them up to flush your toilets. I don't know about washing dishes, but don't break it, and maybe not for laundry too. The other question is, I don't think we will run out of fish in the ocean. Okay? Because if the ocean fails, then we're done. It's our life support system. So I'm very optimistic in the next 100 years we'll still have fish to eat. Peace be to you. Peace be to you.
Here's a question from Ms. Natividad Alakdan from Manila. And I guess this would be addressed to Dr. Catalina. It's on agriculture. How can we reconcile our targets to increase production when many of our arable lands are continuously being developed, either as subdivisions, industrial parks, and even exploited as mining for mining activities? When can we get our act together? I suppose this can also be addressed also by Dr. Girard, since I think it applies to
Very good question. I think the answer is for us to lobby hard and make sure the land use code is passed immediately. Because unless the land use code is passed, there is no way to determine in a national scale the carrying capacity of the land that is arable. Right now, land use is under the sole power of the local governments. So if Los Baños decides to convert all its rice lands to subdivisions, it will do it. And there's no one to stop. That's why all of these packets are happening. Having said that, I've also tried on my part to determine how much land has been converted since 1980 from agriculture to industrial or residential use. I get very different figures. Maybe Sok can help me here. One figure I got is it's only 12,000 hectares. Some say it's 300,000 hectares. Some of the subdivision developers I talk to say, Dr. Padulina, just think of it. It's very difficult to develop even into a subdivision. Look at all this. So he said, now I'm lost. I really don't know. Maybe Ateneo can conduct the research on what this is the problem we have. The decision makers are not fed the correct figures. If your decision makers are not fed the correct figures, it's just like a computer. Garbage in, garbage out. That's why we have these kinds of laws coming out. The legislative bill is not, the legislators are not fed the correct figures. That's why we have problems with importation of rice. They're not fed the correct figures. So that's my answer. The immediate thing that we can do is to get the land use code passed. It has been pending for the last 30 years. Maybe Sok can comment on that. And maybe he can explain.
I fully agree with Dr. Padulina. It's really important that we all work together for the immediate passage of the National Land Use Management Act. There's a bill now in Congress being ironed out, led by the lower house, and there's a counterpart one in the upper house. Now, well, much of the issues on conversion is largely issues on whether we really want to develop the area or we just would like to debate from asset reform laws. Like in case of Sumila, it was converted, but then it was not really developed according to the plan. It was basically the land conversion approved by the government is basically a ploy to debate on governance as history went. And also, like, there's a present case for example, in Aurora, where 30,000 hectares are being delineated for an eco zone. How much land would you need for an economic zone, industrial zone? 30,000 hectares? Now, that law is displacing thousands of small farmers, fishers, and indigenous people. So there are a lot of issues on vested interests, political dynasty consolidation, and all this. So, and these are not very much attuned to issues of food security and combating or mitigating or adapting to climate change challenges.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question from Antonio Flores from Pasig City Science High School. Maybe I will rephrase it a bit, but basically the question is it possible to promote a new staple food for Filipinos for certain crops which are cheaper and easier to produce than rice? Obviously it's for Dr. Padrina, but maybe also globally, has it ever happened that the staple food of certain people have actually been shifted? So perhaps I'll ask Dr. Padrina to answer the question first.
Possible? Yes. It's happening in Africa. The amount of rice being imported by Africa is phenomenal because they are changing from corn-based, cassava-based to rice, because rice is easier to cook and prepare. It's a convenience food. So it can happen. Now, there are certainly cultural, political, social factors that have influenced them. These are the factors that will cause Filipinos to change staple food habits. It is our observation at IRI that rice and wheat are substitutable. That's why their prices also influence each other. So people, if they eat less rice, tend to eat some of wheat-based products. People who tend to eat more wheat, eat less rice. That's why the U.S. is a big rice exporter. They produce only about 2 to 3 billion metric tons of rice, but they're a big rice exporter. Because they don't eat too much rice, they eat wheat instead. And when the prices of rice went up in 2008, it's because of the drought, also influenced by the drought in Australia, that caused wheat prices to go up. So, how this is going to be socially engineered, I don't know. I hear Secretary Alcala promoting other ways of fulfilling our staple food needs. That kind of approach may be picked up by certain communities, maybe depending on their local conditions, because they just have to survive, or maybe a larger group, but certainly it will take a while if that shift will have to occur, because we are, I learned on joining IRI that rice is a very different commodity from other commodities. You don't treat it like it's wheat and corn. It's very different because in the case of Asia, it is so intertwined with culture and tradition. You touch it a little bit, you will see a lot of reaction, unlike corn and wheat. So that can be one factor in shifting the staple from rice to whatever.
No, I don't really have much more to say, although I have a confession to make. I'm an American, but I don't eat wheat. I'm actually allergic to wheat, so I mean, now you understand why I'm here. I'm here to eat rice. But actually, just to add, just to say that in other countries, indeed, I've lived in Ethiopia, in Eastern Africa, and their preferred food there is called teff, and it's very high in iron, and it's actually very good for you, but it's also very, very difficult for them to cultivate for the population as a whole. And so that's another example of a country that, and as well as Eritrea, where it's become increasingly the food for the elite and for special occasions, but they've had to rely increasingly on wheat and corn as substitutes. But again, just to emphasize, there are cultural issues. Food is also very much intertwined with culture, not only in the Philippines, I would say worldwide.
Thank you. This is our last question. It's a question that's been mentioned before, and I'd like to direct this to Dr. Padilla and to Dr. Guerrero. It's about genetically modified organisms, whether it's crops or fish. So basically the question is, shouldn't we be worried about genetically modified organisms and whether in the long run it will negatively impact on ecosystems and ultimately human health?
My comment there is that first, genetically modified organisms is a very generic term. I suppose you are referring to organisms that have been changed through the use of recombinant DNA technology, which is called genetic engineering also. Okay? Recombinant DNA technology is only one tool. It is a process that is used to change the genetic makeup of organisms, rice, fish, trees, microorganisms. The insulin that you now use, if you're a diabetic, comes from a genetically modified Escherichia coli. The microorganism has been engineered to produce human insulin because before then, you were using insulin from pig or cow, porcine or bovine insulin, and you would react. Some would react, allergic reaction. So it's a way, it's a tool. I think at the end of the day, what should be evaluated is the product. Test all kinds of food products that you cultivate or produce using different methods, conventional, recombinant DNA, organic, whatever. They should all be tested for safety, allergenicity, toxicity. There should not be any exemption because that is what in the end will be consumed by the public, regardless of the process. So, it's just a tool. In the case of IRI, if you want to know, only 5% of our breeding program uses recombinant DNA technology. That is where we can no longer find the trait that we want from any relatives of rice. The submergence tolerant rice that you saw is not genetically modified. We were able to find a submergence tolerant gene from another rice and we moved it using conventional methods. But for golden rice, we cannot find any rice variety that would express beta-carotene in the grain. We have searched already. We cannot find. So we have to use the gene from corn to allow for the beta-carotene pathway in rice to be tweaked and expressed in the grain. Beta-carotene is in the rice plant, but it is expressed in the leaf. You don't eat the leaf. You eat the grain. That's where your vitamin A comes from. Plants do not produce vitamin A. Plants produce only the precursor for vitamin A. That's why we cannot engineer vitamin A into the rice, because the vegetarians will object. Because vitamin A is an animal product. You cannot find any plant that produces vitamin A. It's beta carotene. So that's what you then get in rice. And we cannot find that anymore. So we use genes from corn. Lastly, at the end of the day also, whenever you say you transfer the gene from human, say insulin, to an Escherichia coli, okay? What do you now call the gene that is in Escherichia coli? Or the commonalities of the genome of human beings and chimpanzees. What do you call those genes that are common? Human gene, chimpanzee gene? They can only be called human gene if they are within the human genome. And they will be called chimpanzee gene if they are in the chimpanzee genome. My point is, it has become clear in science that genes are independent materials. They can be moved. And their identity is dependent on the whole context of the different genes where they are placed. But it is difficult to defend now that that gene that is common between human and chimpanzee is a human gene, unless you got it from a human being, because they're the same. That's the new knowledge that's now we're trying to see, and some we cannot still understand, because there are some genes which we don't know, which have no function. There are sequences in the DNA that we have that we cannot find any function. So it's getting to be interesting. So make sure your GE has good biology courses, because it's going to be the age of biology. I tell you, it's going to be the age of biology. Those who are very illiterate in biology will not probably understand and appreciate what is happening.
There is no GMO food available in the market. It's one being processed by the FDA in the US, salmon, for anti-freeze, I think, or for engineered growth hormone. But there is commercially ornamental fish in Singapore. They call the blowfish. I think it's a sword-tailed fish, aquarium fish, wherein they put in the bioluminescent gene of bacterium. But it's for ornamental purposes. It glows in the dark night. I don't know for what purpose. Maybe for romance. We don't think GMO aquatic organisms will commercially prosper, because there is that big concern for environmental impacts. If they escape in the wild, it's hard to control them. It's like the golden snail or other species that have wild. It's hard to get them back. You remember the janitor fish in the Laguna de Bay? You don't have a way to control them. Once they escape, you cannot get them back.
Thank you. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I think that the major issue really here among us is the issue of GMO is regulation. You talk about tests. How rigorous would be the tests be so that we will have really confidence in that it will be safe to the public for consumption? In Europe, they may have 52 tests of rigor. In India, that's why the Mahay Committee Talon is not approved immediately by the minister. In fact, there's a moratorium. They need to go into the rigors of the tests. Here in this country, we also ask the question, especially when that GMO is being introduced by a multinational corporation. It's not introduced by government. So that's an issue we will continue to raise. If there is no rigor And if we are not confident on the regulatory powers of government, and especially if our regulatory apparatus being captured by vested multinational corporations, we have a serious issue to raise.
Perhaps I'd like to ask Mr. Anderson for his perspective on GMOs in the world.
Can I just
Sure.
I have no problem with the tests, provided it's applied to all products. Apply it to organic, apply it to conventional bread, apply it to GM. Same test. Because that's the only assurance we can get that we are getting safe food. Right? If there is new product being put in the market, it must go through the same test. Regardless of the process that it was produced. It's just the same with the drugs, They go through the same test, regardless of whether you produce it through a different process or not. So, that's a very good point. And I think we should insist that all food products go through the same rigorous test as the GMOs. Why not?
Not much to add from my side. The World Food Program is actually not a technical agency, so what we actually, our policy is that we respect the legislation that each country has regarding the genetically modified foods, GMOs. There is a technical committee of the Codex Alimentarius, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the World Health Organization that provides the international framework to look at the GMO issues. But of course, it is in some countries, of course, it's more problematic than others. But it's really important for every country to look at, of course, the long-term issues, the environmental issues, but the food security issues, and make informed decisions in terms of how best they would like to proceed in terms of legislation and regulation.
Thank you. On that note, please join me to thank our maybe you can stay away from what do we call this? Tokens and to give to our so we have a plaque of appreciation. Last question. Well, it's a quick question. Sure.
Sorry to have to take a few more minutes. I came here, I'm Mami Tirona from the Consumer Rights for Safe Food, which is now a member of the National Consumer Affairs Council, as council member for food safety. I came here because I saw Dr. Padulina's name, and I really wanted to come because of you, Dr. Padulino. Specifically because in the past 12 months alone, I've been in at least 3 forums where I heard people asking, some personalities asking, or if blatantly actually questioning the relevance of Erie nowadays. So it did not come from me. It just opened my eyes. Several forums. The most recent of which was 2 weeks ago, I think, in a congressional forum conducted on genetically modified rice, or as we call golden rice, which now we have. I'm glad we have high school students, young people. For your information, GM rice. Please Google it when you get home. Google rice today. Golden rice is being developed by Erie now to address, according to Bill Gates, the problem of a lot of people statistically getting blind because of lack of vitamin A. So we have to eat something that will get a source for rice, for beta-carotene. So we are developing that. Although I find that funny for a fact that can we just eat carrots? But that's another matter altogether. So, Dr. Padulina, my question really is a challenge. Because I have heard that precisely because I get nervous with that. Because, number one, you said, and I just had to stand because you just said we have to test for everything in the first place. So I really wasn't going to the relevance of ERI anymore. But when you said we have to test it, everything, you know, I find it funny just as a comment that why do we need to test the carrots that are organically being produced when we're already, it's an old product, but we're talking about new products like GM rice. I think what we need to really put our efforts and money on is to produce new GM products. I think we should not say, let's test the other products that are already there and organic products that we are already producing all this time. So anyway, that's just my personal comment. I would like Dr. Padulina to put forward a challenge of the comments of other people which I've heard. Because they have been worried that we should be so proud that a Filipino is on top of ERI. And we are now the biggest importer of rice. We would like to pose the challenge that, you know, I have this view that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. If we want a better way of using the wheel, let's just make research, use resources to make the wheel better. By why use our resources to reinvent the wheel? So I'm just posing that chance because I was opened up to the question of the relevance of ERI when we are the biggest importer of rice. And that's not really questioning ERI. It's just a challenge to ERI. Yeah, if I see rice, we as a Filipino nation are not importing that much rice anymore because ERI is here and you're a Filipino and you're headed. We will be so proud. Thank you.
I extended the session. Anyway, thank you for your comments. First, I think the visibility of ERI has been reduced since 1987 because we are not releasing varieties under ERI's name anymore. All the varieties that are being released are given local names. So sometimes the variety that is released in the Philippines is an ERI variety. NSIC 222 is an ERI variety, but you don't see ERI anymore. And that's good for the local groups, but it's bad for ERI because we're no longer visible. But we don't mind that because that's really what we're there for. With regard to the question of the self-sufficiency of rice and how we have looked at that, if you recall my talk, I said there are two legs on which development will have to work: technology and governance. I'm not trying to blame anybody, but we do not distinguish technology we share with Vietnam and the technology we share with the Philippines. Vietnam, in spite of civil strife, Cambodia, in spite of civil strife, are now exporters. There is no distinction in the technology we share. So what is the factor? Governance. Unfortunately, ERI cannot have governance. It is us. We have to elect good officials. We keep electing officials who are not familiar with the issues. That's our choice. That was our choice. Okay? So, it's important that the governance factor be balanced with whatever new technology is being introduced. Now, the question of test is still based on food safety. It is not just based on new products. this has to be based on food safety. And food safety is a portion of food security. Because there are instances in history where adversarial countries have used food safety to undermine the interests of another country. So we have to be vigilant. And all new products or even existing products that are, many of our naturally cultivated crops have toxic materials. Potato has toxic materials. Potato has a teratogen called solanine. And if its level goes up, then you get a threshold where it becomes very deleterious to you. Have we ever tested our potatoes that we produce for that? Celery has a photosensitive sensitizing agent, solanine. If it reaches a certain level, you will get photosensitive. So those who are using whitening agents, maybe you just eat a lot of celery and you become white. If it is a celery that has solanine. I'm a plant chemist by training. I know what plants produce. They produce good and bad things. All plants produce good and bad things. As a chemist, I can see compounds that are dangerous if you take it at a certain level. That's why I said we have to test. Because once you change the growing conditions, all of these metabolic pathways are tweaked. Because genes are compounds, they are molecules. They will react to the environment the way molecules react. I'm talking now as a chemist. If you change conditions, they behave differently. The genes are not insulated. And that's why we have these new disciplines such as nutrigenomics and nutrigenetics. Because they find out that if you take fat molecules, they will react with the genes. And they change your whole metabolic system depending on your makeup. So, on that basis, I think for the sake of food safety, we need to test products. We need to put this in place. We're just undermining the well-being of our citizens. We don't put it in place and become very selective. But of course, this is going to cost money. So if you want a system like that, we will have to pay for it.
We'll give the class appreciation. Yes. Can you address Mr. Gasha and Mr. Dias? Okay, this is the flight of observation. I really want to address to Dr. Padalina. Flight of appreciation to William T. Padalina for generously sharing some valuable experiences and insights as resource speaker on the topic of food security and climate change for the 4th S.C. Johnson-Ateneo Environmental Leadership Forum entitled Food Security in an Unsecure Environment, given September 9th at the Young Hall, Canada. educator. Mr. Sok Sanzuela. And last but not least, Mr. Stephen Anderson. Thank you. Well, it's been a long and certainly very fruitful and enlightening afternoon. I'd like to just close by acknowledging and thanking those who made this possible. Of course, I'd like to thank our two speakers, Dr. Pedrina and Dr. Guerrero. Please join me to give them a round. And to our two masters, Mr. Banzuela and Mr. Anderson. Thank you. I'd like to thank the SE Johnson company who is with us today, Mr. Miguel Gracia, thank you. Mr. Mahay, Mr. Mario, I'd like to thank the people from the Environmental Science Department, Dr. Marge Davides, Mr. Gigi Tiambao, Dr. Tess Perez, Dr. Rene Claveria, all of the officers and members of the Environmental Science Society, Environmental Science students, seniors and juniors, the staff at the Dean's Office, and the LS administrative offices. And thank everyone for coming, joining us this afternoon. So we hope to see you again next year at the next forum. Thank you.